We have Eating Well 3, which is protecting the immune system and also reducing inflammation through food. So we're going to talk about those anti-inflammatory foods to decrease risk of recurrence. And this is part of the Eating Well series that is 4 classes. And you can take all 4 classes, and then if you miss one, you can come back and like if you just did 3 this time, next time you could do 1, 2, and 4. So they're very flexible about making sure that you get to all the classes.
Yeah, so as Mary said, today's topic is protecting the immune system and reducing inflammation through food. So then this is the 12 noon class. And then next week on April 2nd, there's a 5 p.m. class. It's the same one. So if you know people that said, oh, I missed it, they can still join us. And then after that, Eating Well 4 starts on April 24th at 12 noon. And then the second class to Eating Well 4 is on April 30th. And that's called Now It's My Turn to Cook. So that's kind of fun because sometimes, you know, a person who's going through treatment, they were the one who did all the cooking, and now who's ever else at home with them, they have to pick that up. So it is a helpful class. And then we'll finish that series. So today with protecting the immune system, we want to talk about how to protect yourself. So I think we learned so much through COVID, you know, about the hand washing and just being careful when you go out in public. You know, if you're immune compromised, wear a mask and maybe go in at different times. Like sometimes on my way to work, I pass a Target and sometimes they open at 7 or 8 in the morning. So I'm like, oh, I can just do that. And there's hardly anybody there. So you would be protecting yourself. But people who are going through chemo most times are immune compromised. And then if you are immune compromised, you just want to be extra careful with who comes into your home, you know, so they don't have colds and sickness, and then the good hand washing, avoiding big crowded areas, and then washing hands for about 20 seconds. And then we're going to talk more about food safety too.
Also for food safety, we want to, the key thing is to have foods well cooked. We don't recommend, for example, having protein foods like eggs runny because that could be a food safety risk for salmonella. And then we don't recommend having meats that are undercooked as well. You kind of want those to be well done. Sushi and raw foods like ceviche, those kinds of seafood that's raw, we don't recommend during treatment because of the food safety risk, not because of the fact that it will interfere with your medication. So dairy, we do recommend the harder cheeses like cheddar. If you want to have something a little more adventuresome, like Manchego, Swiss, baby Swiss, those are all fine. The softer cheeses like blue cheese, I always kind of talk about how it's kind of the moldier cheese. That's going to be more of a food safety risk. We wouldn't recommend that during treatment. Some of the other softer cheese like brie or camembert are kind of the same way. Because of their mold content, they might be a food safety risk. Grains, we want to avoid those bulk sources. We're not really using the bulk things since COVID, like Nancy said, anymore. We don't really have those bulk bins. So those would have more of a food safety risk and more of a chance to have little bugs and things like that. Fruits and vegetables, avoid the fresh salsas made on site. They're extra hands touching things, kind of like the deli meats. We want to be very careful and buy the pre-packaged microwave to steaming at home as opposed to getting the ones that are in the plastic bag.
Yeah.
And just make sure that you're avoiding unrefrigerated desserts like those cream-filled pastries that they've been sitting out for a long time. That's not a good idea. I know when I was growing up, my mom used to make pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving and just set those out on the counter, and that was it. We kind of, that's, you know, that was our system, and nobody seemed to get sick that we know of. But during treatment, we want to be a lot more careful, and that's really not recommended now anyway, to have those pies sitting out. So I tell people too that if you have people bringing over food, just make sure that you're careful. If it doesn't look good or smell right, this isn't the time to be polite and just say thank you and tell them you'll eat it later and maybe toss it.
And sometimes even if people are offering to do the meal train, kind of know who they are. Like I know my friends, I know they have very clean kitchens and good handling, but if it's people that you don't know, you'd be a little, wary of that, because you don't know if they have pets or cats walking on the counter, we don't know everything about that.
Another dessert, or even an appetizer that's really popular right now is using the honeycomb with cheese and bread. And the honeycomb is not usually pasteurized. So that's one that you would kind of, honey that's pasteurized would be fine. So if you're using the honey with your ricotta on your bruschetta, that's fine. But the unpasteurized, we just want to be a little bit more careful. Same with water. Like if you're on well water, we would recommend using bottled water during treatment and making sure that you're being very careful with water in general. You want to have juices that are pasteurized and milk that's pasteurized, and then avoid those. We're getting ready for some spring and summer. We want to avoid that sun tea and things that are sitting out for a long time, because those might be more of a food safety risk. You can use those herbal teas by making regular tea, though. That's totally fine.
Some grocery stores might feature, oh, fresh squeezed orange juice today, and they're doing it, and like, oh, I have a sample or whatever. But we don't know if they've even washed the outside of the oranges, so that's why we just discourage, the unpasteurized sort of thing. So I'm going to continue on with some safe food handling. So again, the 20-second rule for washing your hands in warm soapy water. I know some people do the ABCs or count to 20 works too.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, there you go. And then refrigerate foods that should be refrigerated 40 degrees or below. And don't let foods that are perishable sit out. As soon as you can get them back in the fridge, the better. And then hot foods need to be over 140 degrees. And then do not refreeze defrosted food. So if you did thaw some chicken and then you're like, oh, my plans changed, you pretty much have like 3 days to use that as long as it's refrigerated. But you're not to thaw a meat, cook it, and then refreeze it. You shouldn't do that. It should be like fresh, cook it, and then if it's never been in the freezer, you can put it back in, put it in the freezer. And then, when you're shopping for perishable foods, like right now, it's pretty good. It's cold out. You can put the groceries in the car, and if you have to do one more errand, I guess it's okay. But really, as it gets warming up and our cars get heated up, once you do grocery shopping, go straight home and put it right away in the refrigerator. You don't want to take risk with that. And then just thoroughly washing fruits and vegetables before using them. So even using like a little vegetable brush to cause a little friction, but you want to wash the outside of everything. I do, I bet you do too, because it just becomes a habit. Even a banana, because you think of it, food's coming in, produce is coming in on a truck. People drop stuff in the store, put it back on the shelf. They might cough on it, whatever. So it is good to do that washing. And then when you cut into something, you're not transferring bacteria into it. And then do not use soap or chlorine or commercial product rinses. So you don't need to wash your vegetables with soapy water, just straight running, cold water or.
Yeah, a lot of times people talk about the vinegar wash.
Yeah.
It's not needed.
No, because vegetables are porous and they could absorb some of that, and you don't want that. It can give it an off taste. But with soap, it could be a food safety hazard. So we don't want to do that. And then like packaged lettuce, you want to give it another washing. So we are using some spinach in our soup that we're making, but we always wash the lettuce and it freshens it up too. And then not to eat vegetable sprouts because they're often associated with foodborne breakout. And that's the other thing is pay attention to the news. If there's a recall on something, then, be wary of that. So
there's been a recent cinnamon recall. So you can usually just check by Googling like cinnamon recall and it'll tell you which brands are recalled. So that's something to keep in mind. We do recommend cinnamon a lot as, part of the anti-inflammatory foods.
it gives flavor to food. So yeah, it's a common spice in our spice cabinet.
Yeah, so if you do find fruits and vegetables that are like slimy or moldy or something like that, it's best just to toss it at this point. You don't really want to hold on to that. Don't, I know my husband's like, I'll taste it and see if it tastes okay. Now it's not the time to be tasting it.
But it's that old adage, if in doubt, throw it out, if you're not sure about something.
Yeah. And then we don't want to buy prepackaged cut up fruit and things like that that are in the store because those are, have extra hands touching it, kind of like at the deli. You know that there are extra people working with it, then it's just a little bit of an increased food safety risk.
Yeah, if it's done on site where people are cutting up butternut squash and putting it on the shelf, that's what we want you to avoid. But if it's coming in from a company, cut up and already sealed up in a bag, that's okay. But just know that it's got a very short shelf life because once it's exposed to the air or oxidation, it's gonna go bad quicker. So it's better to get the whole vegetable and then do your own preparation.
Trader Joe's has a lot of good options for foods that are already cut up and in the prepackaged bags that are okay. So that's a good one if you're looking for things to make quick, easy meals. It's a good idea to be careful about the tops of cans. We talked about that a lot during COVID and some of our videos. And just an FYI, we do have a lot of videos online about recipes, and we have a lot of recipes online. I had a patient tell me this morning that she was trying some of our recipes and
Cool.
tried the ratatouille and said she really liked that. So don't forget to use that as a resource and check out Living Well YouTube videos as well. We have a lot of things online to help you out with that. So then also you want to make sure that you're using different utensils if you're stirring and cooking. If you're tasting it, then put that one in the sink and then use something else to stir and serve.
But never taste right over the pot or whatever. Always like either put in another dish and taste or take a spoonful and then walk away so that you don't unnecessarily drip into it. Because if you're serving other people, it's not a good thing.
It's a good idea to throw away cracked eggs. You don't want to keep those. And then throw out foods that look or smell strange, kind of like we talked about it. I like this where they, in our slide, it talks about using your senses, your eyes, your nose, your touch, but not your mouth. But use your senses to look at the food, even if you're purchasing it, to look at the food and make sure that it looks good and it has a nice appearance, because that'll be a time to know that you shouldn't get it.
So what Mary was talking about with the cracked eggs is if you open a carton, you're like, oh, there's an egg with a crack in it. That's the one you want to throw out. The others are okay, but you don't want to use that cracked egg because it could, be part of the foodborne thing.
Make sure we have a little slide in here about cross-contamination and making sure that you're using a different knife for raw chicken, for example. Then you want to wash that. Same with cutting boards and any utensils that have raw meat. In the refrigerator, you want to keep food sealed, store raw foods away from any ready-to-eat foods, like leftovers from a restaurant, for example. You want to store those separately. And if you are thawing out meat, we recommend to thaw that out in the refrigerator, in a pan, and use a clean plate for the grilled or cooked meats. So you basically just want to keep all of those separate. They have a picture here showing broccoli right next to the raw chicken. And for dietitians, that makes us kind of like fingernails on the chalkboard, right?
Yeah.
So just keep the raw foods separate and everything you're using with the raw foods.
Yeah, and when I'm going to thaw some kind of meat or poultry, I usually put the package in another bag or in a container because you never know while it's still frozen. It could have a little tear in the package that you don't see, even a pinprick size, and that can start leaking in your refrigerator. And that's always say the lowest shelf. So in case something like that happened, it's not going to drip onto other foods. So poultry especially is, very contaminated, I guess you'd say, until it's cooked. So then cooking foods well, you do want to have a good thermometer. This is what they call an instant read, but there's some even nicer ones like Thermopens that are really nice. But these are like the eyes to the product. They tell you if it's done, and there's no guesswork then. When you use a thermometer, like you want to put it into the thickest part of the product. So like if you were doing poultry or a turkey, you put it into the thickest area of the meat to get your reading. And each area on a turkey has a different reading that you want to get to.
Nancy has a lot of experience with the Butterball turkey hotline. So.
Yeah, it was the cooking line, and I did for 10 years. It was a seasonal job. It was all dietitians, and people would call in and started like kind of like the end of October. And then we got going by November 1st, and we had training, Butterball University, and it was really cool. But I learned a lot, and then my kids learned a lot too. One time my son, he just wanted to test the line, so he called on Thanksgiving. Can I talk to Nancy? And I was like, why you? Luckily, there was two Nancys, so. But anyhow, yeah, if you want to test your thermometer to see if it's accurate, you would put this into cold ice water and stir. You have to stir, because then it gets everything moving, for the temperature, and it should be 0. But if you're trying to do boiling water, it should be 212 degrees. And that's just to see if it's a working thermometer. And if it's not, then either you can recalibrate it or just get a new one. This is one of those little inexpensive instant read, so it's not too much. And then when you do take temperature of foods, the poultry should be 165 degrees. And then leftovers and casseroles should also be 165 degrees, so you're reheating. And then ground meat should be 160 degrees. Whole cuts of red meat, 145 degrees. And then eggs and fish, 145 degrees. Microwave cooking is okay, just you have to stir when you're reheating to make sure the heat is distributed.
So when you're grocery shopping, you want to kind of look at the can or the container and make sure you're looking at the correct date. The use by date is different from the sell by date, and the sell by date is different from the expired date. So if it's expired, for sure, you don't want to use it. So, but the use by date means that you can use it a little bit after the sell by date. Sell by date is telling the manufacturer how long they can keep it on the shelves. A lot of times foods don't have all 3 of these dates. They just have a date. And so if it says, it should say EXP or expired at this date. And that's the date you really want to check to make sure that you're not consuming anything after that time. And I know sometimes it's frustrating because food is not cheap. And you get it home and there's only a couple of days left or something, but just be careful and remember you're important. And don't keep it if it's past the expiration date.
And everyone should be checking their pantries for dates. Everybody, like every few months, go through it. And maybe sometimes people will pull stuff to the front if they know they've got a little bit of time left, but not much, to try and remember to use that, like create a meal with that.
You want to make sure not to use or even buy cans that are bulging or have a dent in them. There may be something that is dented, but there might be like a little micro opening there where food safety could be compromised. So just kind of look at the packaging. If I know sometimes like the boxes will be kind of like half opened or something like that. Not very often, but it's something just to keep in mind and to be a little bit more careful about during this time. So, and then we talked already about prepackaged deli meats. Those are the ones that you would buy and then microwave to steaming at home before you would use that. Avoid unrefrigerated cream and custard containing desserts like we mentioned. And the free samples Nancy already mentioned as well.
Well, I
And
don't know if
then-
I did, but you know,
Yeah,
free
just-
samples are out there again.
Said about the orange juice and
Well,
so all of the free samples.
Yeah.
There are more hands touching them and it's probably not a good idea. So
People
if
call
it looks good, take it home and make it yourself.
but like even at like a Costco, like there's a lot, people love going there for samples. I wouldn't do it. Yeah, because there's too many people milling around and waiting and you never know. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then never leave your groceries. We talked about maybe wanting run errand, but it is a good idea to have good practice of keeping your groceries in the car just until you get home and then unload them and put them in the refrigerator right away. Just so you're kind of missing out on that food safety risk.
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, like back to that whole use by and expiration. Sometimes it's good to just start going through your freezer and start using stuff up, and same with your refrigerator, so you kind of get it down to a lower level and then you can then start fresh with adding it back in, because sometimes you forget what you even have until you start like, oh, let's make this tonight, you know.
And it's a good idea to label what you have in there. A
Yeah,
lot of times right? I see some head shaking. You think you're gonna remember and then you go back and it's like everything looks brown. So you're like, what was that?
but like with Easter coming up, I told my husband, we're using everything up in the refrigerator because I need the space, you know, I'm hosting, so it's a good time to do it. So then tips for dining out. So, I mean, I feel like dining out is really part of our social culture. Like it's enjoyable. It's time where you two can talk and or go out with friends and have a good time. But do try to go at an earlier time so that you avoid the big crowds. Oftentimes they have specials too, the early bird specials, but that would be good. And then ask that food be prepared fresh in a fast food establishment. So like, you know, if you went to a certain place and you know that you could see everything and the person starting to do your order, you might ask them to put fresh gloves on because you're like, when was the last time they might have changed it? And if you ask in a nice way, people are very accommodating. Um, and you know, if you see that some food's been sitting for a while, just you can ask if they can freshly cook something for you. But it's all on how you ask too, I think. I think we notice in restaurants that you're not having the big ketchup bottle or things like that on the table, that the restaurants are still going with the little individual servings, which is good because it helps prevent germ transport, everyone touching that. Don't have raw fruit or vegetables when you eat out. And that's a tough one for people because some people say, oh, I love getting salads when I eat out. But the whole thing is we don't know how well the produce is being washed. So we want to be extra cautious. So you want to have cooked food when you eat out, like a soup or a hot meal. And right now in the winter months, it's really not a big deal, but yeah, you want to avoid the raw foods when you eat out. You can have them at home, like you can make yourself a salad because you know you're going to wash everything and then go that way. And like Mary said, avoiding the freshly squeezed, unpasteurized juices. You want to get pasteurized juices, which you would see in the cooler part. Um, and then just some things for food safety. If you are eating out, you know, avoid any smorgasbord or anything where there's a group, everyone waiting, like a salad bar. I don't think there's even that many anymore. But in the summer, if there's like a graduation, you be the first person in line to get your food. So you're not getting the tail end of it because it's still really fresh. But restaurants should have the utensils set on a napkin or a dish. You know, or on their placemat when you go down, when you go for dining. Like you don't want bare silverware. It should be wrapped in a napkin or in some kind of covering. And then leftovers, it's hit or miss. Some restaurants, like I like to cut whatever I'm having in half and ask for a container. So I'm just eating that amount, so I'm not like over full. But some restaurants still will ask to take your plate away to put in a container, but you continue to ask them to bring the container to you, and then you put it in there. But I know as COVID is being lifted, people are going back to some of their old ways, but it's still okay to just ask for the container.
So we get this question a lot about how can I protect my immune system? And we wish that there was one food that would help with that, but we don't really have one food that's going to be the answer. But we do know that there are foods that help with anti-inflammatory properties. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. And a couple of key things. One is to eat the whole food and to eat a variety of food. So like instead of uh, having zucchini that's already frozen. Try to get the whole zucchini, chop it up yourself if you can. That's one of the reasons why we're here and we're doing recipe demos and tastings, because we want to encourage people to cook at home and realize that you can do a quick meal in 10 or 15 minutes and it doesn't have to be complicated. I think a lot of people think that cooking at home means you're chopping and dicing for hours and it's very complex, and you'll see what we're making today is pretty simple and we put it together pretty quickly for you guys.
We like the little quote that says nutrition starts in your kitchen. So when you, in a positive way, when you're getting fresh vegetables and fruit and, you know, that's where nutrition starts. We're not talking about open a bag of chips like, oh, I'm having good nutrition right now. We're talking about cooking and using fresh foods.
So another thing that we kind of have as a reminder is eating from the rainbow. So even our food models up here, you can see there are lots of colors. If you think about having a lot of color on your plate, or even just during the week or in your grocery basket, you know, buying things that give you lots of color, all of those little micronutrients in those foods are going to be helping you and boosting your immune system. Supplements, a lot of people are asking us, like, can I just take these pills that have vegetables in them or fruits in them? And those are not giving us all the nutrients that we need. And we're discovering more and more micronutrients, the teeny tiny ones that are helping. There's some plant stanols, for example, that really help with heart disease, and lycopene that helps prevent prostate cancer and things like that. So a lot of these little teeny tiny nutrients. And then when you think about like milk, calcium, vitamin D, and magnesium, that's a perfect triumvirate for calcium absorption. So we really need to think about real food and whole foods when we can. Those are going to give us the best nutrition.
And also studies are showing that nutrients from fresh foods are much better absorbed and utilized versus kind of like an imitation type source.
So drinking plenty of water is also good, and getting sleep. And sometimes that's difficult during treatment to get a good night's sleep. So we usually recommend about 64 ounces of fluids a day. Coffee, tea, water, all of those count towards your fluids. Things that melt, such as sugar-free Jello or occasional ice cream. Those are all going to go towards your fluids. So make sure that if you are having juices, the juices are going to give you some antioxidants too, although we just recommend those in moderation. And then if you have questions, you can always talk with your dietitian, because we are here. And if you're not part of the Northwestern system, and those of you that are online, you can always reach out to us. We have an Ask the Dietitian email address, and you can send in those questions to Living Well, and they will give them to us as well. So we know that sleep and stress and exercise and taking time to yourself are also good parts of protecting your immune system. Many studies show that low-grade inflammation is mitigated by having these healthy behaviors. And a lot of times that can mean just taking a walk. I like jazzercise. That's a kind of exercise that I like because the music really motivates me. And so if you can find something that you really like, that'll be helpful to de-stress. There are some fantastic exercise opportunities here at Living Well as well, which is great. And the grounds are so beautiful here. So those are some ideas too. Or I know Nancy likes to walk.
Yeah. I used to think, oh, I have to walk with a friend, and then I realized I can walk by myself. So I put my phone on Pandora and I just let it play out loud in my pocket. I don't put the earbuds on. And then I just do my walk, and you see nature now, you see ducks in a pond and robins, and it's just so calming. And you're like, wow, I'm so glad I got that in. So find your route and figure out how much time you want to do the walk. And if you're new to it, start in stages and then gradually build up. But it's a really great way to exercise. I'm going to be starting on reducing inflammation through food. So there's two types of inflammation. There's acute and chronic. Acute inflammation is when you might get a splinter or, a blister. Your body's equipped to take care of it. It can heal things really well. And then after a couple of days, it's healed. But chronic inflammation, that's when you have things like diabetes, your blood sugar's out of control, or if you have asthma, that's out of control, or arthritis. And that chronic inflammation is linked to many diseases like diabetes, arthritis, depression, and Alzheimer's. And so through that, that's what we really promote: eating the rainbow, eating anti-inflammatory foods, because that's going to be one thing you have control over to help reduce inflammation in your body and help for healing. And then, like Mary was saying, just like the stress management is so important, making time for yourself every day. And as you go through treatment, you want to protect up here, meaning, do something every day that you enjoy. So you're making time for yourself, but trying to stay positive too is really important. And just not overdoing and doing everything that in your power that you can do to stay healthy. And then, yeah.
So we recommend the Mediterranean diet and lifestyle, which is part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommendations, as well as American Cancer Society. And all of our recipes are Mediterranean based. So that's kind of good to know. You know that when you're looking for our healthy recipes, of whole foods. So those are all going to be part of the Living Well background. The Mediterranean diet means adding, a lot of people think, oh, that's only beans and it's only plants. And we do recommend, if you can, eat foods that are a lot of plants, like fruits and vegetables and beans and things like that. But it does include chicken and fish. It also includes dairy products, slow-fat dairy products, and whole grains in moderation. So it does have some carbohydrates. And then having the healthy fats like olive oil, avocado, peanut butter in moderation. Those are all part of the Mediterranean diet, and then activity is also part of it. So just kind of having that as, I love this graphic because it kind of encompasses all the foods that are recommended. And then the next slide really talks about specific foods that are inflammation fighters. And so we recommend these a lot. And I think many of you are probably eating black beans or almonds or beets, berries. I think those are incorporated a lot in our everyday life. Chia seeds may not be as much, but chia seeds aren't a bad idea to add to your yogurt or make a pudding. Cinnamon, check for the current information that I mentioned about cinnamon. But cinnamon is a great way to add an anti-inflammatory property to your yogurt or your oatmeal, or even some, chilies or things like that. Citrus fruit, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower. We were just talking about maybe doing Brussels sprouts, doing a cauliflower steak recipe at some future class, because that's really popular now and it's so tasty and gives you those good anti-inflammatory properties. We have some dark leafy greens in our recipe today, so that's good. Ginger, we also have with some onions. So those are going to be anti-inflammatory as well. And we're going to talk about using fresh ginger, which is okay to have. Peppers, tomatoes, turmeric. Sometimes, you'll see in the literature about food as medicine, and it really, I really think it is true that a lot of times we need to kind of think about branching out and trying new foods and learning about how they can help our bodies, because there are so many different ones out there.
Yeah, and even Mary just mentioned turmeric. We're gonna throw some in the soup too, because when you have an orangey soup that has like sweet potatoes or carrots, butternut squash, people don't even know it's in there, but you're adding another anti-inflammatory food. And then when we were just making the soup, I go, oh, this soup would be good with a can of black beans. And we didn't have any, but like sometimes you can do that with a recipe if you're like, oh, wait a minute, I could add a little more protein and then just do it. And the recipe's your own. You can make it your own. So you can tweak things and add different ingredients to suit your taste.
I love turmeric with broccoli and cauliflower and roasting it. So that's a quick, easy way to use turmeric. And it's really good with just cutting up the broccoli in little 1-inch pieces and the cauliflower. And then you put it together because that gives you some nice color. And then you use just a little olive oil and turmeric and maybe a little pepper. And that's really good. And then you can use that in salads or sandwiches or throw it in your soups.
So also the takeaway then today is for planning meals is try to include a variety of foods in your diet. Mainly include a variety of fruits and vegetables, varying the color. Try something new once a week. It never hurts. Or like Mary's saying, when you roast vegetables, there might be vegetables that like I didn't like Brussels sprouts way back when I was a kid, but now when you roast them, oh my gosh, it's so different. They caramelize and just take on a whole different flavor, and they're wonderful. But try to have complex carbohydrates, which is fruit, vegetables, whole grains. That's what's going to be the important thing, and stay away from the sugar and sweets, or just have it for once in a while in moderation, like a little piece of dark chocolate is fine, but not to replace a meal with just sweets. That wouldn't be good. Start doing small changes, like if you get regular pasta, you can try the whole grain pasta, or if you're used to doing white rice, switch to brown rice, little things like that. And then I just personally try to avoid the sugars, like when I cook, like I'm gonna be making this berry cobbler this weekend, but I don't need the sugar in the berries. I just use the berries and then add a little lemon juice and it tastes great, you know. So your taste buds do start to change a little bit where you have less need or want for salt or sugar when you start taking it away, but using like the fresh herbs and dried herbs, garlic and onion to replace the salt. And then just the fruit has such natural sweetness.
We're getting excited for the Living Well Garden
Oh, yeah.
this summer because that'll give us a lot of our fresh herbs.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll just remind people that you can get those little herbs that are in pots, even at the grocery store. And if you put those in a nice big container, they will grow taller. They usually die because in the small pots, there's no place for the roots to go. So if you put it in a nice big, container like this, it'll grow 3 or 4 feet, and then you'll be able to have it all through the summer.
So when you do plan your meals, try to think that half your plate are vegetables and a little fruit, and then you have some protein and then your whole grains. That's going to be considered like a balanced meal. And then if you do find that as you go through treatment that it's really hard to eat a full meal, you can just eat what you can and then have a snack in between. If you do that where you're eating 5 or 6 times a day, try to have protein with each meal and snack, and that allows you to get adequate protein. Nuts are always a good thing to keep on hand. We want you to avoid raw nuts, but roasted nuts are fine. And if you do just have raw nuts, you can put them in a skillet and just toast them. They change pretty quickly, but stir them and, or you can put them in the oven. But nuts are vegetable protein, so it's really good. Yeah, so just eat a varied diet, try some new foods.
There's some blueberry models here, blueberries, and then I also see this rice has some red and green peppers in it. I like that idea of like what Nancy was saying, where you can add things in. It doesn't have to be a huge meal plan, right? Like tonight we're making a stew where you could add a few peanuts on top if you wanted, or you can add blueberries into the salad that you're making at home, or with cottage cheese. So just think in terms of adding these foods in smaller amounts.
We're going to wrap things up in a minute, but I wanted to mention, I like to keep those packets of brown rice. You can get, certain ones have nothing else added, just brown rice, but I'll keep that on hand. And if I'm getting close to where I need to go grocery shopping and I still have a few vegetables on hand, I'll chop them up and saute them and throw them into the brown rice. You can crack an egg into it and then let the egg cook into it. But it's a great way to use up vegetables. And maybe you want to have a meatless meal that day, so you can just have vegetables with the rice. And it's good. I'm going to be making it this weekend too, just because the little kids do like that. So I'm like, sure.
So just to end up here with some good habits, we want to increase fiber. Women need 25 grams of fiber per day. Men need 35 grams of fiber per day. So having adequate fiber is good for your digestive system. And we're talking a lot about the microbiome now, where we're using just talking about how we need to keep that healthy. And then add the phytochemicals from the colorful fruits and vegetables like these blueberries, add those in, especially herbs and spices. Make sure your vitamin D consumption is at a good point. We have seen some studies that show if your vitamin D is low, having vitamin D supplement can improve health overall and decrease risk of recurrence. Drink tea and adequate fluids throughout the day to try to get that 64 ounces in if possible. Stay active, exercise regularly, and you can start with 5-minute increments of exercise. So focus on regular time for relaxation and stress management. And then make sure you preserve and protect your sleep. So go to bed a little bit earlier, just so that you can start to wind down. I know a lot of people are looking at their phones right before bed, which kind of activates our brains. And so we want to kind of, do something relaxing right before bed.
I
So
started turning my phone off at night. I don't know. I used to not, but now I do, just so you don't start getting texts or whatever late at night. But we're going to move over to the kitchen part now, just Mary and I.
I was just gonna say also, it says don't smoke, so we'll just
Oh.
throw in that little, that little tidbit.
So we're gonna be making the soul soothing African stew. It's really good. It's a vegetarian soup, but it has really good vegetables, and we'll get that going.
Start here with sauteing some onions and garlic. So let me turn on this burner here. We're gonna let that heat up just for a minute. And then I wanted to show you, a lot of people are intimidated by fresh ginger, and there you can see my hands. And this recipe calls for just an inch of fresh ginger. And I think people are kind of wondering, like, how do you get this peel off without cutting all of the ginger off? And if you just can see, you see me? Yeah, you take the spoon, and actually it's a great way to get the peel off of ginger without having to cut off all the ginger. So you can kind of see how that works really nicely, nice and clean. And then you just can do that, like say an inch of it. And I'm gonna just do a little bit more here. And then that part, you can kind of get in the crevices on the sides as well, which is great. It makes it nice and easy. Now, if you want, you can use like a grater or microplane. I just use the old-fashioned knife and cut a piece off. And then there's a little bit of paper there. I'll just cut that off, a little bit of peel. And then just use your rocking motion on your knife, or you can chop it like this where you have your hand on top, and then just kind of chop it nice and small. One thing that I've noticed is if you are using fresh ginger in a recipe, everything tastes really good. So I was telling Nancy when our 3 boys were little, I was just trying to get something on the table. So I didn't use a lot of fresh ginger. And now I'm a really big fan because it just tastes amazing.
If you have leftover ginger, you can actually store it in the freezer. And that way it's much easier than to peel because it's softer.
That's what I was just gonna
Oh.
ask. Where do you store it? How do you store it?
Yeah, you can just wrap it up in plastic, put in a little freezer bag and put in the freezer. And you've got it.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, good.
And it is really easy to use that way. So I'm putting in my ginger and, I'm sorry, the onions and the garlic. And then we're just gonna show this kind of quickly to show you, we want to get those nice and soft. And that's the first part of the recipe. And then I'm gonna put the last bit of this ginger that I just chopped up.
Smells really good.
I know, I was just gonna say, it
Yeah.
smells really good. Those of you that are here, we can, you might be able to smell it. And then I'm just gonna saute these until and we used a small little fry pan or skillet to show this step so you could kind of see better. But we started it in this nice pot here.
Yeah.
So.
All right, well, I'm gonna do the
continue.
sweet potato. So this is really the main vegetable in the recipe. We got some nice ones. I got 2 nice medium ones. And how I start is I just peel them first, peel them all up. And then I'm just gonna, you have to be careful. Like here I've got a flat edge, so I'm gonna kind of like get it to where I can lay it on its side. Because you don't want this thing rolling around on you and then you slip. Whenever you use a knife, keep your eyes to the cutting board so that, you know, because this is really sharp, you don't want to necessarily get cut. So you can just cut them kind of randomly, maybe like a 1/2 inch to 1 inch pieces. And so Mary's got that going in the pot, then I put these in next. And then I put the lid on, and the lid, it's going to allow for it to start sweating. I put a little bit of the broth in just so there's some moisture, just maybe a 1/4 cup. And then with the lid, and it forms moisture on the lid. And that's what's going to get your vegetables soft, so they're pork tender before you add any more broth. Because if you added a whole bunch of it now, these pieces would not get cooked. All right, and then let me just, yeah, so done with that. I can add some to Mary. You want me to add to your skillet, Mary, or not? Okay.
Yeah,
We're sharing the skillet.
the onions are almost done,
All
so,
right.
but the potatoes are gonna take a little longer anyway, so I could put these onions right into the stew. that you
Yeah, go
have
right in
already,
there,
and
yeah.
then I can cook
So
the
then the
potatoes.
next one is a red pepper. Look for a nice firm crisp one, like nothing real squishy. That means it's old. And then red peppers stay longest on the vine, so they do have the higher amount of vitamin C. So red peppers, there's a lot you can do with them. And they add nice color and good flavor to your meals. Some people have a harder time tolerating a green pepper, but a red pepper is usually pretty good. All
So
right,
you can see the onions are getting a little translucent. We call it opaque, where they're not super white, they're kind of clear. And then I'm gonna add these right to the stew. You wanna, oh,
1 second. So if you can see what's in here, we just have, everything Mary just talked about, the sweet potato and the red peppers, so they're all nice and soft. And that burner's on, so I just turn that off. There you go. All right.
all right, so I'm gonna add these onions in.
I'm gonna use your skillet.
Oh, okay.
You can put it on that burner over there. And I just don't want to add these hard ones in here because I'm not sure if they'll be done in time for when you guys eat it. So I'll let it cook over here just a bit. And then after this, we're gonna add, let's put this on. I'll put the lid on this one. And then we're gonna add tomatoes. So we got a whole big can of crushed tomatoes, and then we're just gonna throw them right in here, the whole thing. Okay,
Crushed tomatoes is a great item to keep in your pantry because you
Yeah.
can make a quick soup with it. You can make a quick sauce with it. It's a good idea to kind of have that. I like that brand that you have, and also the San Marzanos are good. But that's a good thing to have around. And it's got those good anti-inflammatory qualities with this fresh tomatoes,
all
or
right.
canned tomatoes.
So if you want to add your peanut butter.
All right, so we have a little bit of peanut butter that we're gonna add in. And it's about 2 tablespoons, and it just gives the stew a little bit more protein, but also good flavor. A lot of the African recipes do have peanut butter because that's something that they have readily available in their geographic area. And
Mary and I tend to differ on this. I say just do like maybe 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, and she's like, oh, I usually put more. So it's individual. I don't want the peanut butter to take over the whole recipe. So you kind of find out what you like best. So either way, you can do whichever.
yeah, but it is a good combination. I feel like the peanut butter and the tomatoes,
Oh,
but
yeah.
something that we don't really think of using, right? But it is a good idea to, how you can get some more protein in there. Same with like using peanut butter in oatmeal or peanut butter in cream of wheat or something like that, where you can get, some additional protein and the healthy fats, and that's helpful.
Okay, so we're gonna add a little broth. Do you have anything else right now you want to add? Okay, so I'll add some of this.
Just add the spices.
So we have a vegetable broth, and it is a low sodium brand, which we like to get. You can get vegetable broth or vegetable stock, but we like that it's low sodium because all of us are trying to cut down on salt, but then you bring out the flavor using fresh herbs and vegetables and garlic and onion. So now it's okay to add all this broth because the vegetables are pork tender and they'll just be fine in here.
So it also is good to have the whole foods like we talked about. And yeah, I like how the soup is coming together. So then for the spices, we're gonna add a little chili powder and a little pepper. And you can add that or not, depending on how you're doing with tolerance during treatment. We didn't add a whole lot, but you want to have a little bit of flavor in there. Yeah. So we're gonna kind of bring that to a boil, and then we'll be adding the spinach.
I'm just getting a little liquid here so they don't burn and they can absorb some of this liquid. So we can add that back into the pot.
Okay, so I think that's about everything for our soup. We're going to be having a tasting for those of you that are here in person. After we get that temperature, we have to wait for the temperature,
Okay.
I think, just to get a little bit higher. And then we're gonna add in our spinach. The fresh spinach is just going to wilt quickly when we put it in there. It looks like a huge bowl, if you can see it there at home as well. And once we put it in there, it's gonna just what am I looking for?
Wilt.
Dissolve and
Yeah.
wilt. So it'll be much smaller, probably 1/4 of the size, and it'll add some good texture and some good flavor and antioxidants to our stew.
So you can add black beans if you want, or garbanzo, whatever kind you like. And when you serve this, like I remember one time my daughter had a friend over for dinner and she was vegetarian. So I made this and then my husband goes, "Oh, that was good. What's for dinner?" And I go, "That's dinner." So I just served some crusty bread with it and maybe some cheese. But you know, you can make soup a meal and it was fine. So, yeah.
I think it's nice to have, we were kind of looking for some nuts or sunflower seeds as a garnish. We decided we're gonna use the spinach in the soup, and then we cut up some spinach because we don't have our fresh basil right now because of the season. And you wanna try to eat local if possible. So this could be a nice little garnish, at the end of your meal, just to put that on top. You could also use like a little Parmesan cheese or maybe even a little bread that you've toasted as a little crouton. That would be a good garnish too. And then that's about it about our recipe. So we'll let that spinach cook through, and then we'll be sampling that for those of us that are here. And for those of you that are home, we hope you'll try this recipe. And we appreciate you attending our class today. So we'll look forward to seeing you at our next series of Being Well or Eating Well, whichever one you can attend.